Hi everyone, welcome to my green closet. So we are living in some pretty crazy times. I hope that you guys are taking care. And I wanted to film a quick little chatty video about a mental trick or a mental exercise that I do a lot that really helps me with anytime I'm feeling anxious or worried or stressed out about something. And I just wanted to share it because I find it incredibly helpful, and so hopefully some of you might also find it helpful. So this is something that I've actually done quite a while subconsciously, especially when it comes to thinking about climate change and the climate crisis. But I wasn't really aware of it until I read this book called Happy by Derren Brown, which I highly recommend reading. It was a really great book. It's very philosophical though, but in the book he talks about this tool or this technique that you can use and how important it is to focus on the things that you have control over. We put so much time and energy and emotion into things that we ultimately have no control over. And the idea is to instead redirect that into the things you do have control over, which are our thoughts and our actions. And what you do is simply take a step back and ask yourself, what is inside of my control and what is outside of my control? And maybe this sounds kind of simple, but it does take work and it does take time to recognize when you're really mentally invested into something and sort of break away and be a little bit more objective about it. And it is something I constantly have to work on and remind myself to do, but I find mentally it really helps me deal with situations. And I'll give you guys a couple examples of this. So let's say with this whole coronavirus, COVID-19 thing, there's a lot going on in the world, but there are so many things that are completely out of our control. How the governments are choosing to handle things, how other people are reacting. And so putting a lot of energy and time into that doesn't help us in any way. So the idea is to instead focus on the things that are in your control. So washing your hands, staying home as much as possible, taking care of your neighbors or your community. So another issue is the climate crisis, which I talk a lot about on my channel. And I've gotten a lot of questions throughout the years of how I handle all of the overwhelming and depressing and like eco-anxiety that comes from thinking about all these things that are happening in the world and seeing our environment degrade and everything that's going on, governments that aren't doing anything. And what I do is exactly this. There are things that are completely out of my sphere of control. For example, what the governments do. We have some control when it comes to that. We can vote, we can also contact our politicians and have our voices heard, we can maybe protest. But in terms of like how policies are written, how they're implemented, and what the government ultimately decides to do, that isn't in my control. So focusing on the things that I can do just gives me some direction. And feeling like there are actions and steps you can take is really good, and it gives you something to focus on and at least feel like there's something you can do. And typically I will just check in with myself in my head, but sometimes it's also helpful to write it out as a list of the things that you have control over and the actions that you can take. And that's also why when it comes to sustainable fashion or other conscious living things, I really encourage people to focus on the areas where you can make changes and you can have an impact, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed by and really frustrated by all the things that you might not be able to do, maybe the things you don't have access to or you're not able to change depending on your situation. And instead of focusing on those things and feeling really bad about all those things, focus on the changes you can make and the positive steps that you can take. And I've also found this really beneficial in helping others. So instead of taking the approach of, telling people what they should and shouldn't do, I can't force somebody to do something or I have no control over somebody else's actions. But what I can do is be a good role model and have information and tools available and lead by example. And I've actually found that to be way more effective at getting people to try new things or getting them on board than trying to change their behavior. And this also works for personal situations. Maybe you have a social event that's coming up that you're really anxious about. Maybe you're going to be meeting a bunch of new people, and it's really natural to be worried about what people might think of you or how people might see you, but I don't have any control over what somebody else thinks of me or how they treat me, but I do have control over my own actions, and I can try my best to be a kind person and be a good friend. So going into any situation like that where I might be nervous or anxious, I do that little check-in with myself, and anything outside of my control, I try my best to let go of. And what's really interesting is when I started doing this more consciously, I realized the absolutely insane amount of energy and time I put into things that I could have no impact on. And that doesn't help anything. It doesn't help the situation. It doesn't help me. My time and energy is so much better spent on things that I can actually do and change. And again, I'm not at all saying that this is an easy mental shift to make, but just taking a step back when you can and when you think about it, to think of the things that are inside your control and outside of your control, at least I have found just immensely helpful. And it has definitely made me a happier and a more optimistic person. So anyways, this may or may not work for you, but I just wanted to share it because I have found it to be an incredibly helpful exercise or technique. So maybe it's helpful for some of you, and I'd love to know in the comments if this is something you do or what you think about this. Please take care. Thank you for watching, and thank you so much to those of you supporting me on Patreon. I especially appreciate it during this crazy time, and I will see you in the next one.